Welcome everybody to our program tonight. My name is Mark Maltby. I serve as president of the Owensboro Area World Affairs Council. We're a nonprofit educational organization, and we put on programs like this about 3 times each semester. And so we're happy that you could come tonight. I wanted to thank Brescia University for allowing us to use this facility, as they always have. And Sister Cheryl, thank you very much. And also wanted to extend thanks especially to Daniel Cuthey, who made the arrangements for our speaker tonight. And so I think it's appropriate that Daniel provide the introduction to our speaker. Usually we have these programs that deal with, terrifying international events today, terrifying diseases and germs and stuff, but here's Daniel to give you a little bit of background on our speaker.
Hello everybody, welcome. Thank you very much for coming out. I'm political science faculty here at Brescia University, and we're very lucky to have Angelia Sanders coming and joining us from the Carter Center. She works as the Associate Director of the Trachoma Control Program currently. She has her Master's in International Study from Old Dominion University and then Master's of Public Health from University of South Florida. And prior to this, she's done various work in international aid and education, in disease prevention and eradication, including working with the Peace Corps, with an NGO that she started herself with 1 or 2 other people called Tamani Africa, and now with the Carter Center, which does a lot of great work, waging peace, and the other catchphrases that it has. So please, everybody, welcome Angelia, who will give us this excellent presentation.
Earlier today I spoke to one of Daniel's classes and they asked me what our motto was, and I wasn't actually sure, so I had to kind of pull out a business card and look to see what the motto of the Carter Center is, which will be my second slide. So today I'm going to talk about neglected tropical diseases and specifically focus on 2 of the diseases that I have worked with the Carter Center, one of them being trachoma and the other one guinea worm disease. There are some pictures that, not graphic, but you'll probably squirm a little bit in your seats. So the mission of the Carter Center is waging peace, fighting disease, and building hope. And that's the Carter Center overall. The big focuses of the Carter Center, most people know them as monitoring elections and doing conflict resolutions. And they don't realize that actually the bulk of the Carter Center is focused on public health diseases in developing countries. So the mission of the health programs is fighting disease and building hope at the grassroots. So really going into countries and working with the different ministries of health, ministries of water, ministries of education in order to do programs. And with this, the characteristics of the Carter Center, and one of the things that I think makes the Carter Center unique is this focus that programs need to be owned by the governments in which you're conducting them. So it's not you as a foreigner that are coming in order to do this great thing to make you feel good about yourself, but having a government say, this is what we feel is a problem, can you provide technical assistance and usually financial assistance in order to help us help our communities. And it's really important that programs be developed with that in mind, because if you're talking about sustainability, if the governments don't think it's important, then the work is never going to be as good as it can be, and it won't be continued after you leave. Also, what I appreciate about the Carter Center is that the focus in a lot of the discussions is that this is a ministry program. So this is not a Carter Center trachoma control program. It's the Ugandan Ministry of Health Trachoma Control Program, or the South Sudan Guinea Worm Eradication Program. And using data in order to make decisions, using the data in order to understand what is occurring in the communities, and then measuring your impact and using that to drive your programs, not what is popular or what there's currently funding for. And that's been something why the Carter Center has focused on neglected diseases, because these are the diseases that do not get a lot of public attention and public finances. There are lots of different neglected tropical diseases. They're very diverse. They're found in almost 150 countries in the world with people who have either one or more, and this is about 1 in 6 of those living will be affected by NTD in some way. Because of the effects of NTDs with either leading to death or also severe disability, this has a very big impact on a country's ability to create a workforce and sustain sort of economic growth within the communities. And so you have this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy or kind of multiplier effect where diseases are found in very poor countries, and so those who are poor, they often become sick, and then because they're sick, it keeps them poor. And so the key is, how do you move into communities in order to break this cycle? We won't go through all of these different diseases, but some of the NTDs that are out there, they're ones that a lot of times people don't realize the fact that there's actually still leprosy. You know, this is something when people read the Bible and they hear about leprosy, you think that this isn't something that still exists, but there's actually people who still have, that become infected and affected by things like leprosy or rabies or other diseases. The ones that are starred are ones that the Carter Center is actively working with. 2 of these are ones that I will discuss. There's a global commitment to eliminating different diseases. 5 of the NTDs can be targeted with drug therapy, and these are called PCTs, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. And one of the things that make these disease eradication or elimination programs possible is because we have the commitment of some of the larger pharmaceutical companies that do donate drugs to the programs, which are a very vital part of the work. I think it's important, before getting into some of the statistics, is just to put pictures up, not so much to make people uncomfortable, but to realize that beyond the numbers, I mean, these are human beings at the heart of it. So these are people that want to provide for their families, they want to get the most out of life, but they are afflicted by diseases that are preventable. And things, again, unfortunately, a lot of these are not rare. So you have what we commonly call elephantitis. So you have 2 men who are suffering from elephantitis. These in the bottom corner are blind from trachoma, which I'll discuss. Up here with those who are blind from river blindness or suffering some of the other side effects of river blindness. And then here we have a boy who is affected by schistosomiasis, which is something that affects the organs of people who become infected and predominantly affects children. And in communities that it's very highly prevalent, it took a while in order to convey that this was something that you could prevent. And most people in the community, because it causes you to bleed when you pee, they thought that it was just the male equivalent of like a female's menstrual cycle. So they just thought it was kind of this natural thing that happened, instead of realizing this was something that they were getting contaminated with from the water. The Carter Center, these are the countries where we work with our NTD programs. We actually, in November, just celebrated our 500 millionth or half a billionth treatment as part of the NTD programs. These are just kind of some of the numbers, so really scaling up in order to reach communities. So to get into specifics of 2 of the programs, the first one with trachoma control. The life cycle of trachoma is that it's predominantly, the burden of the disease is higher in children. And what happens is that the children are kind of just dirty. Even my sister's children, I find them kind of dirty, just by their nature. They're crying, they have snot coming out of their nose, boogers in their eyes. And so flies that carry the bacteria, which is in the same class as chlamydia, so it's chlamydia trachomatis, they carry it on their feet. And they'll land on a children's face because they're attracted to the proteins that are found in the mucus on their face. And so every time that the fly lands on their face, they have the potential of infecting the eye. And with repeated infections, it leaves a small scar. And this next one is where some of the pictures. So you have a very healthy eye when you flip someone's eyelid, and this is one of the things we do in order to determine the amount of trachoma in the community. And it's something very easy. Kids, I mean, I'm sure all of you had siblings that would flip their eye in order to gross you out, or you do it to gross out other people. So you flip your eye and you look for a really healthy inner eyelid. Well, when a person becomes infected with trachoma, which at the early stage we say TF, it becomes sensitive and inflamed. With repeated infections, eventually the eye starts to scar. And most things, like if you were to cut your skin, when you have a scar, it pulls the skin inwards. And that's what happens on the eyelid. So every time you have scarring, it just starts to pull your eyelid in further and further to the point that over time, your eyelid turns completely in and your eyelashes are then touching your eye. And that means that every time you blink, your eyelashes scraping your eye and cutting your eye. And you think about when we get one eyelash in our eye, everything shuts down until you get that eyelash out of your eye. You can't function, you can't focus on anything. And so when you imagine that you blink about 15,000 times a day, every time your eyelid is just being cut over and over again. And that's what happens with trachoma, to the point that it basically cuts your eye and you can no longer see. So it's not something that you can repair like a cataract surgery. Once it's damaged, there's no going back. And because the pain is so much and that people can't focus in areas that have a lot of trachoma, you'll go around and you'll find that people are wearing tweezers around their neck. And the reason is because they'd rather just pluck out their eyelashes in order to deal with the pain than in order to be able to function. And so these are actually some of the homemade tweezers, and we'll pass around various things that I'll pass around that we get from the community members in the areas where we work. So the areas that the Carter Center, what my program supports, are currently we're in Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Uganda, Mali, and Niger. And we've reached our targets in the areas where we worked in Ghana and Nigeria. So the important thing when you go in with the disease program is you first establish a baseline. You need to determine, do you actually need to be there? Not because the country has really nice beaches and you would like to set up a nonprofit, which annoyingly, we don't have any countries with really nice beaches that have trachoma, which is what I'd prefer. But going in, flipping people's eyelids in order to determine how much trachoma is there, and then managing your program based off how many years you think it will need to be. And then regularly going back into these areas in order to monitor your progress. So in the case of Uganda, we have where the prevalence of trachoma was over 30% in some areas, and this was mostly it's a region called Karamoja that is very marginalized by the government, extremely poor. They tend to move around with cows, very limited resources, and so you find the disease is usually in the poorest of the poor and the most marginalized communities. And then after interventions, we went back last year in order to see how our progress is, and we're very happy. We want green, so our goal is to have less than 5% in the communities. So we're slowly getting there, and each time we go in order to do these surveys and determine if we're making progress, if we're not, asking ourselves critical questions, what are we doing wrong, and being very honest. If trying something, if it doesn't work, own it, and then find a way to improve. And this is just an example of some of the locally trained staff, training them on how to flip eyelids in order to look for trachoma. So the way that we treat and prevent trachoma, we use the SAFE strategy. So the S for surgery, A for antibiotics are the treatment components, and then the F, facial cleanliness, and E, environmental improvement, are the prevention components. For surgery, the procedure in order to, again, you can't recover any lost eyesight, but you can at least prevent damage from it becoming worse and take away the pain. So we train nationals on how to conduct the surgery. It's about 15 minutes per eye. Do it in very rural settings, and you make a small slit in the eye and use sutures to basically kind of take the eyelashes from pointing inwards and pulling them and having them point out in the right direction. And this is surgeries that we're doing. First screening, put a piece of tape, make sure you know that you're doing the correct eye, and then doing surgeries in the field. So this picture I took when I was living in South Sudan, and there was a very small clinic that had given us space in their storage area, hence all the boxes in the back. And this is a camping tent that we bought from REI because we're moving in very remote areas, and so basically carrying around camping equipment in order to do surgeries in the field. So most of you would probably not have surgeons wearing flip-flops during your surgery. And so this, actually, very happy, we got, even though it was a small space, but we actually had a cement floor, whereas some of the other areas, this was also in South Sudan in a church, but kind of run down, but again, it's mostly connected to poverty. So during the week, they would allow us to set up our surgical theater, if you will, and conduct surgeries. And these are areas that don't have electricity. I mean, South Sudan is the size of France, and it has 60 miles of paved road. So your logistics is quite challenging. There's definitely no electricity, especially in the areas where we work. So even doing things as simple as sanitizing your equipment, you would have to hire people to go out and get firewood so you can light a fire and use to sanitize your supplies. The next for the treatment is the antibiotic distribution. We use Zithromax, which is a drug donated by Pfizer. And this is a drug that's not something they don't make money off of more. The Z-Pack makes a lot of money in the U.S. And it was through discussions with President Carter that he actually met with them and convinced them that this is something that they should do just sort of as a moral support to an activity. And they agreed to continue to fund, to provide the drug through the elimination campaign. And so that's something that without that donation we would not be able to make the progress that we have. And the drug distribution occurs with doing a one-time distribution of everyone in the community, so kind of a blitz campaign, going in, treating the community all at once. And most of these areas, people are not literate, and so you'd have like a proper doctor's office where you're measuring people's weight. So we have sticks that we travel with to the different villages, and it'll say numbers. So here, this lets you know that a person of this height gets 1 pill, 2 pills, 3 pills. Those above get 4. And so that's how we use that in order to determine how much medicine they get, or in the case of children, because they're too small in order to swallow the drug, we'll have letting you know the milliliters in that case, and then doing a training and having them. And so all the drug is provided by those in the community. They're the ones who take responsibility for giving the drugs to those in the community, which is very important because most of them are volunteers, and most of them tend to be women as the sort of the leaders of health in their community. And with that, every treatment is recorded as much as possible. So sometimes the key is actually finding enough people who are literate enough to record the names or the ages in order to help the programs. It can be a challenge. So the logistical magnitude of these programs are quite impressive. On the prevention side, facial cleanliness, like I had said, the flies are attracted to children. So, you know, a lot of us, we've seen the fundraising campaigns where they show children covered in flies. And that was actually President Carter, when he talks about what made him want to get involved with trachoma, is that he remembers going to a village and he thought that there was this child. I've heard him say this story so many times. He thought there was this child who was wearing sunglasses, and when he got closer, he just saw that there were so many flies on the child's face. And then he realized the prevalence of trachoma, and he often talks about that he remembers when he was young, trachoma was a very big problem in the farming areas of where he lived in Georgia. So even in the United States, this is not something that we haven't had here. The United States had problems with trachoma. Those in Ellis Island, actually when immigrants would come into Ellis Island, in the containment areas, eyes were flipped in order to determine if people had trachoma coming from Europe. So it's not something that's a sort of foreign concept to the United States, but with improved sanitation and hygiene, that disease, like many others, went away. So we work with the communities in order to educate mothers about the importance of washing face. But again, these are areas that have very limited water. So when you're talking about, you're not turning to a tap in order to easily wash your kid's face. This is water that you have had to literally spend maybe hours to go and collect, and you're using it for more you're prioritizing it more with either cooking or drinking. And so trying to convince them that this is something that they need to do, it's a challenge. And we do this using different educational materials. So developing materials that the communities respond to, pictures that they like, and I kind of brought some examples. So this is one that we used in South Sudan, and we would go through, teach those in the community on how the important messages. So there's no words on it, because we know that where this particular item was used, people aren't able to read or write. And so kind of telling a story about trachoma and leading communities through the process of learning what the disease is and also how to prevent it and what they can do to treat it. And so this would be one in South Sudan, made out of material that people could carry because, we're walking, don't have vehicles. And this is one that was developed, I'll give you both at once, for Niger. And so this might be used by a health worker that has a little bit more education. And so on one side, you would have pictures showing behaviors that are negative, and then as you go through, you're positive. And then on the back, we have it in French and Arabic, so that it could be used in different parts of the country, and they would be able to reference the language that's most relevant. For the last one, environmental improvement. These are areas where culturally latrine use or outhouses. Obviously there's no toilets, flushing water. So educating the communities about the importance of not defecating in the open. So it's one of those, behavior change is one of the most difficult components, I think, for any nonprofit to work on, because it's very difficult to show a donor behavior change. I can report every month how many surgeries I've done, how many pills I've put into people, but it's difficult to say, 10 people did not poop outside their house. I've walked into villages, so I definitely know when they've pooped outside of their house. And behavior change just for humans, it doesn't matter which nationality or what country you're in. We all know behaviors that we should be doing, and we know behaviors we should not be doing, and we still eat at McDonald's, and we still do these different things. So it's a very slow process, but conveying that just because your ancestors did it doesn't mean that it's something that you should continue to do. All right, so that's for trachoma. Now, guinea worm. Guinea worm is an eradication program. For trachoma, it's elimination or a control program. Because it's a bacteria, for trachoma, it will never disappear in the world. It'll always be there, but you want it at such a low level that people are not becoming blind from it. However, guinea worm is a program where once the last guinea worm is removed, then it's done. And it's something that no one will ever suffer from again. I will pass around I've been trying to keep my water bottle and my guinea worm straight. So I'll pass around a guinea worm I smuggled outside of South Sudan, so I definitely want it back. So hopefully this will be the only time you'll see one, because they will no longer exist. But for those of you who really like facts, when President Carter made it his mission, and the mission of the Carter Center, to eradicate guinea worm, in 1986 there were 3.5 million people in the world, spread out over 20 countries who had guinea worm. Last year there was 25 in 4 countries. So it's really close. We're actually competing with polio. So we really want to beat polio to be the next disease to be eradicated. And guinea worm will be the only disease eradicated purely based off of behavior and health education. There's no medicines, there's no drugs you take. It's purely based off changing your behavior and basically breaking the life cycle of guinea worm, which I'll talk about. The 4 countries, and this is what has kept guinea worm still a problem, is Ethiopia, South Sudan, Chad, and Mali. So most of those are not the securest places. South Sudan is currently in the middle of a civil war. Mali, with the coup and sort of extremism up in the north, has made it difficult in order to reach in those regions. Chad, it's been under a dictator for a couple of decades and also is surrounded by less than stable countries. And then Ethiopia, again, not where it is in Ethiopia is right along the border with South Sudan. So what we're remaining with, and similar to what you find with polio, is just very difficult areas in which to carry out programs. So the life cycle of guinea worm disease is, this is a water-based disease. If a person, so for example, if I had guinea worm, about 9, 10, 11 months after becoming infected, I would have no idea that I've become infected, and I would start to get a blister, and it would start to burn. After a little bit of time, the blister would burst, and you'd see kind of the end of a worm would pop through. And it really hurts, and it burns in the sense that when something burns, you want to put it in water. So my first response as a villager is, because it's usually in the lower half of the body, is I go into the community water source, which this is something we try to educate against. And when I go into the water source, the worm recognizes that it's been exposed to water and it releases its eggs. Once the eggs are released into the water, there's this water flea, or a copepod, that swallows the larva, and that is an important part of the life cycle. And I'll explain how that is connected towards the prevention side. So inside the water flea, and then you have a villager that comes to that same water source, they collect the water, and then they drink it, and then the cycle starts again. So the way that we work in order to eradicate it and prevent it is through village-based surveillance, health education, case containment, bait, a larvicide, and putting in clean water. So with that, surveillance, this is the biggest thing, because it just takes one person with guinea worm walking into a water source that will create an outbreak the next year. And you don't know how successful you were this year until about 10 months, and then you know whether you did your job or not. So as employees, you don't know whether you're going to keep your job until about 10 months from now. And we heavily rely on village volunteers. Again, it's mostly women. And these are very remote communities. This is a picture with the villagers that I lived with in South Sudan. And I really like it because it's straight National Geographic, except latex gloves. So we had provided the latex gloves and gauze and things that they needed in order to treat people in their community that had guinea worm disease. And just providing those sort of basic health concepts is some of the residual positive effects with health education. And doing the supervision, which is important. So this is a coworker of mine. In a lot of these areas, again, because there's not roads and there's not infrastructure, when the rainy season happens, there's times that you have to move with your bicycle because of your Land Cruiser can't get there. It's filled with water, and so we're having to carry our bikes across a river in order to reach a village with a rumored case of guinea worm. So really having to track down every single rumor. Providing health education about the life cycles. Again, a lot of people have different sort of superstitions or traditional beliefs about where it came from. With most disease in a lot of these communities, people think that it's a curse. So either a curse from God, or they've been witchcraft from the neighbor because they want their cows. And so they're just kind of getting over that logic that they have and explaining that this is something that is found in nature and that they can be prevented. But it takes a lot of time. You have to build up a lot of trust that people believe that what you're telling them is true. And with the prevention of the life cycle, so I had mentioned with the fleas, even though the larva is very tiny, the water fleas are big enough that if I were to pour water through my shirt, it would filter it out. So you don't need this very elaborate system in order to filter water. You don't have to boil. You don't have to do these different things. You just need to pour it through a fine cloth. And so the program developed different tools or filters that we would hand out to these communities. One of them is the pipe filter, and it's basically a straw, and then we just put a little bit of cloth in the bottom. And because a lot of people travel, we did it in a way so that they could wear it around their neck, almost like a necklace. And originally we had them with string, but we realized that people were removing the string in order to make jewelry because they would really like beads. So I actually started to put beads on the necklace with the hopes that they would then treat it kind of as something that they would wear and that they would keep the filter on it. And so adapting the different tools to make it useful for the community. Though you want to make it useful for them for your program and not other things. Our original versions of the cloth filters that they would put over like a bucket or where they would collect water, we realized was the perfect filtering thickness for moonshine. So they were actually diverting our cloth filters to use for filtering their local brew, which is not helpful. So we actually had to kind of change the way that the cloth was designed so that they couldn't use it for their moonshine production. They were annoyed for a while, but then they got over it. And then case containment. So the worms can get pretty long. I've removed one about this long from a person's body. You can have multiple ones. They come out from everywhere on your body. One man that I treated, he had 18 worms at one time. So had them from his wrist, bottom of his foot. He had one coming from his testicles. Just had these worms. So obviously, and he was a man like in his mid-20s, so a very important economic provider for his family, and you can't work when you have worms, very painful worms coming out of the bottom of your foot. So this is how it kind of contributes to the poverty, maintaining that poverty cycle within your home, because not only was he able to work, but then you're keeping usually your children home to do the chores for you. So you're keeping them away from school and other activities. So the key is that when a person has a worm, that you keep them 100% contained, and that means keeping them out of the local water source. And currently we do that through straight up bribing. So at this stage, when you're so close to the end game, we have them in a kind of like a hospital tent that we set up in areas that have cases, a history of cases, and there's a fence around it, and we say, we'll provide food to you and your family, and these are areas where food is very difficult to get. Bring your whole family. We'll feed everyone 3 times a day, and when you leave, we give a mosquito net, a bed mat, and now we actually have a financial reward that if you stay in a containment center, I think it's in South Sudan, $50 a day, and if you report someone who has guinea worm and you bring them to a case containment center, you also get money. Because at this stage, you're spending a lot of money trying to get it eradicated. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation is actually one of the bigger donors to this eradication campaign. And President Carter actually joked, he's like, it would be cheaper to just put them up at the Hyatt than, our current methods. But the problem is you gotta find them. And there are no Hyatts or Four Seasons in South Sudan. And so that incentive is really helping kind of bringing those last cases, and that's how you also know that your program is reaching everyone. So the further along that you come in the eradication program, the more money you offer, because you want everyone who suspects they have guinea worm to come forward. I think they're still negotiating what the final amounts will be. I think the United Arab Emirates, when they were at the end, it was like either $1,000 or $5,000 for a case, and no one came forward, and so they could say, we're confident that they've eradicated it in that country. With a bait application, this is a larvicide. With the flea that I discussed, we will put it into the water sources. You can see that this is not very appealing water, but this is the water that the communities have. I mean, it's like chocolate milk. And this is the water. So this is me in South Sudan. And this water source is what the animals drink. It's what people bathe in. It's what they wash clothes. It's used for drinking water. It's used for cooking. So everything centers around this water source. And it was the source of infection the year before, and then therefore the sources of cases for this particular year. And what we do is when we, with that mapping, with knowing where the endemic villages are, right before we expect the worms to emerge, we go and we put this larvicide called a bait into the water so that it kills the water fleas. So if the larva, if a person walks in, if there's no fleas, then the larvae die. So it kind of takes out that middleman and prevents the life cycle from continuing. But when you talk also about education, I mean, you're having to kind of train community members on the concept of volume. How do you measure volumes of water in order to add chemicals? So it takes some practice. Lastly, with guinea worm and safe water, at the end of the day, most of your diseases all come down to a lack of clean water. And people will often ask, if I were to invest in one thing, for me it would be clean water, and then the second would be sanitation facilities. So within the sort of nonprofit community, the acronym is WASH, so water, sanitation, and hygiene is really at the heart of most diseases that we have. And getting different organizations and groups willing to pay for, in this case, boreholes to be put in communities so that they have access to the clean water and not have to use these other water sources. The important thing with this kind of work, and again what I find very admirable about the Carter Center, is the monitoring and evaluation that goes with the programs. And I think this is really, when you look at organizations, you have those who sit in the capitals, and then those that really go out to the bush and make sure that the work is being done the way that it should be. And it's not easy. So this is village from the air, all the different compounds, and it takes time in order to reach these different areas. So sometimes you have a vehicle that can drive up to the front gate. Other times you might have to walk for hours. Other ones, if it's rocky, I mean, you might have a few days that it takes you to reach these communities. And with that, sleeping then in the communities. During my time there, during a given month, this is my tent from I built up a lot of points from REI during this time on camping gear with sleeping in the tent. So during a given month, usually sleeping in a tent about 20 days out of the month, setting it up in the community. I can say that goats, for some reason, really like rubbing up on your tent in the middle of the night. Yeah, they're attracted to the tents. I'm not a fan. And just kind of sleeping there, kind of creating that community trust with the people that you're working with helps. And this would be the compound. So when I wasn't in a tent, then this would be my compound that I would return to. Turn on the generator, charge the laptops, those kind of things. And then also, just again, the different sort of things. So bathing out of a bucket. This is our pit latrine. I would like to highlight this ginormous lizard that was in there for a few days. We tried to woo it out with chickens and all sorts of things, but it took a while. And then the vehicles just moving in the different areas. Lastly, one of the current challenges right now, I think, well, I know for Carter Center, but also just with nonprofits, is the level of insecurity has really increased. South Sudan, this past year, more humanitarian workers died in South Sudan than any other country, which is difficult. I lived in South Sudan for 4 years, so it's not easy when a country... I've lived in South Sudan longer than I have any other place. And so when the shift towards humanitarian workers, there's definitely in the past sort of the rules of war that were more keenly observed, and you just see the rules of war, if you will, has gone down. So humanitarian workers are being targeted just in order to make a political statement that you didn't necessarily have before, or just because of resources. Right now in South Sudan, they recognize that you as a foreigner have wealth physically on you, and so you become a target just because people are in desperation. It's not something personal. It's for their livelihoods, and there's very limited consequences. So it's difficult to expect consequences for things like carjackings when there's an overall war and acts of genocide that are happening in the broader context. And I think this moving forward is something that's going to become more and more of a challenge within this field, and things that people are, if they're interested in becoming involved in, should be aware of. So lastly, I like ending with this picture. This is a girl in one of the communities where we did the drug distribution. She has her little cup of where she had gotten the Zithromax, the syrup. And I just really liked this girl. She was just very positive, really fun to be around, and she just carried around this, her doll. So it's a Coke bottle full of sand with some fake hair, and then a smiley face drawn on the cap. And this was kind of like her most, precious thing that she would carry with her. And I think it's good when you look at someone like this, is that the purpose of this program is order to prevent this girl who has her whole future ahead of her from becoming blind. Because if things were to be left as they are now, she'll become blind. This particular area of South Sudan, normally trachoma, the advanced stages, you find in people over 40 years old, because it takes that repeated infection. In this particular district, we were finding children as young as 7 that were already starting to go blind. So this is a disease of the old that we're finding in some of these areas that are affecting very young children. And so having a program like we have now will hopefully, if things stabilize, will enable her to be someone that contributes to her society and is able to help them develop. So, all right. I do have just a 1-minute little trailer. If you're interested in this kind of thing, the Carter Center had 3, if this has piqued your interest, they have 3 documentaries that were actually shown on PBS, I believe, and I think they're good. So they have one on river blindness, and they're all about 56 minutes, one on guinea worm, and then one on trachoma. and I'll show you just the 1-minute trailer.
This woman's name is Abene, and she's at the end game. Each time she blinks, she's had eyelashes like swords scraping and cutting her cornea.
The kids are the reservoir of infection of trachoma, and the flies that are attracted to the kids' faces go straight to the mothers.
She's blind in this eye. Because this is a disease of old people in other countries. But in Ethiopia, there are kids as young as 10 or 11 who've already had the whole process.
What I've seen was the impact of health education.
When the community is committed, anything is possible.
What we're doing is having the audacity to challenge Mother Nature to try and kick trachoma out of here.
That is all. Any questions?
Have questions, either Justin, one of our wonderful students here at Brescia, or I will bring you the microphone. So just raise your hand because we're recording this. If you speak into the microphone, we'll have that on record. So thank you, Angelia. And do any of you have any questions?
Thanks very much. Obviously, you and the Carter Center both are doing really, really good work. How is the Carter Center funded, and are there federal funds, and will they be in jeopardy soon?
Yeah, that's the big question right now. So the funding is, for most organizations, is a mixed bag. For example, the guinea worm program receives funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation as a big donor. You have different entities like the Hilton. The Hilton Foundation is a donor to the trachoma program. The Lions Club is actually a very large donor and a partner with the Carter Center in Mali, Niger, and Ethiopia. Different organizations, different government organizations. So the U.S. government, through USAID, we get some funding from them. DFID is the UK equivalent of USAID. And then individual donors is always a large contributor to the Carter Center. And we have a very good representative donor. Jimmy Carter is very good at representing the Carter Center and gaining people's interest. And it is something that, moving forward, though we hope he lives forever, he's very honest in that he will not be. And looking for the way forward, how as an organization are we going to work moving forward without having President Carter? And there's a lot of pressure on those of us who worked with guinea worm. He has said very clearly, and he said it to the press, that he really wants guinea worm to die before him. And that was his, when he had the melanoma cancer, he kept saying, I really want to outlive guinea worm. And so we're all trying to make sure that happens. So we need some of the countries to start participating, and wrap up their civil wars would make it easier. And with moving forward, actually a lot of us were very worried, but they said that historically funding for NTDs has been higher under Republican-led houses and Senate. So NTDs with diseases tend to be something that both parties have shown interest in. What that dynamic will be moving forward is a little bit different since we're kind of in a new realm, but everyone's very hopeful that we can agree that these kind of diseases are bad.
Has the situation with the political instability getting worse made it harder to get people willing to go serve in these countries?
It's kind of twofold. One, you don't want to ask people to go. So it's that combination as a program. At what point do you recruit people to go into areas? And that's something that we always monitor. And there's different sort of levels of when you would have a foreigner that's a higher target than maybe someone from that community. And if anything, it's really kind of strengthened the focus on local capacity as much as possible. But it is more challenging. Younger people are much more willing to go into difficult areas. It's the nature of youth to go into different areas. But I think it's unfortunate now, they call it sort of I think the term bunkerization of humanitarian assistance. So in the past, you would live in communities much more freely, and now, sadly, you tend to create more of an enclave with security people. So you're really losing that connection that you've had. I found that the ones that were the most engaged, usually religious sort of institutions, tended to be more rooted in the community. So I was in a very remote area of South Sudan, and there was a Irish Catholic priest that had actually been based there for 10 years and spoke the language. Most of us, we didn't speak the language, and he had that personal connection that I think made his work very, very productive and really well respected. One of my funny stories is that at one point we did need some security services. We had to hire a security guard, and bullets are very difficult, and as a humanitarian worker, you really don't go out, you don't put a line item for AK-47 bullets, but we were able to buy them off of a Nigerian priest who would get them as an offering from the community. So the community didn't have any money, and bullets are very valuable, so when they would pass around the offering plate, they'd actually give bullets, and then they didn't need them, and we're like, well, we need bullets, so and I think that line item was just security services. So no one was like, security services from the diocese, that's a prayer? Are you buying prayers?
Well, thank you all very much for joining us here at Brescia University for this event that was co-sponsored between Brescia University and the Owensboro Area World Affairs Council. And I know that people in this area have very divided opinions on Jimmy Carter as a president, but I think we can all agree he's done some great things as an ex-president. So thank you very much, Angelia, for all the work you do and for joining us and teaching us this evening.
Thank you.